large crowd gathered at the port of Leith on the east coast of Scotland to bid farewell and good luck to 5 ships carrying 1,200 colonists to the Americas. Their aim is to set up a colony in the Darien Isthmus, modern-day Panama, and to eventually build an overland connection between the Atlantic Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. The hope is that this will bring Scotland great wealth and prosperity. The 1600s have been a hard century for Scotland, consisting of war as well as an increasing economic dependence on England. However, as bad as the 1600s were for Scotland, the 1690s were disastrous, bringing both famine and calls for a political union with England. However, most Scots first and foremost believe Scotland should try to become a great colonial power like their powerful southern neighbour. In a bid to challenge the English East India Company and to reduce Scottish economic dependence on England, the Scots founded the Company of Scotland on the 26th of June 1695. The founding of the new Company of Scotland no doubt had help from William Paterson, who was also one of the founding members of the Bank of England. The Company of Scotland was to be founded with public subscriptions, and soon after being founded they set out to raise funds. Initially, the Company of Scotland was to have Dutch and English investors funding half, and Scottish investors funding the other half of the company. Immediately, the East India Company was hostile to the Company of Scotland, as they saw them as a threat to their monopoly in the Indies, and so pressured King William III to get rid of any support he had for the Company of Scotland. Without the support of the king, both English and Dutch investors pulled out their investment in the company. Despite this, the Company of Scotland still managed to raise £400,000 through investment from Scottish people and nobles alike. This was a huge amount of capital, about 20% of the wealth in Scotland. Despite the initial aim of the Company of Scotland to break into the markets of Africa and the Indies, Paterson managed to convince both the Scottish government and the Company of Scotland to start a colony on the Darien Isthmus. Paterson had long seen the potential for an overland route across the Darien Isthmus, and he believed whoever controlled it had the potential to become very rich, because this would save ships the time of travelling around South America. With all the necessary plans in place, the colonists, along with Paterson, his wife and son, set off. The route they took was long, around the top of Scotland, so as to not draw the watchful eyes of the English, who were opposed to this attempt of a Scottish colony. However, the passage over Scotland instead of through the English Channel proved to be difficult, with many colonists calling it the worst part of the journey. In charge of the expedition and subsequent colony was the First Council, consisting of 7 men. The First Council was to govern until a parliament was made. Arriving at their location 4 months later on the 2nd of November 1698, the colonists named their new home New Caledonia, and with that they set about to bury anybody who had died on the trip, including Paterson's wife. After completing their grim task, the colonists next began construction of defences around the colony, with the most notable being Fort St. Andrews, which had 50 cannons. As the colonists began to settle into the new homeland, the difficulties would soon begin. Farming proved difficult, and the natives, although not hostile, didn't want to trade for anything the colonists had. With the onset of summer came malaria and fever, which killed many colonists, with all this exacerbated by food stocks beginning to run low. At the same time, King William instructed the Dutch and English colonies to not supply the Scottish colonists, not wanting to upset Spain. With everything going wrong, the colony was abandoned 8 months after settling in July 1699. Only 1 ship made it back to Scotland, with the rest sailing to the English 13 colonies. Disease still killed on board the ships though, and only 300 out of the 1,200 colonists survived the first expedition. Word did not spread quickly enough to prevent a second expedition of another 1,200 colonists. They arrived on the 30th of November 1699 to an abandoned, desolate colony. Because of this, morale was low and infighting began to take hold. The colonists began to sink into apathy until Alexander Campbell of Fonab was sent by the Company of Scotland to organise a defence. Despite some initial luck getting the colony back up and running, the Spanish closed in and began to siege Fort St. Andrews. After a siege of 1 month, the Scottish were allowed to leave and take all their guns, and in February 1700 the colony was abandoned for the second and final time. When news of the disaster reached Scotland, it caused tremendous uproar, as so many people had invested so much of their money into the scheme. Between 1.25% of the available wealth of Scotland was spent and lost, crashing Scotland's economy. This disaster, and the subsequent economic crisis it caused, was one of the main reasons that Scotland signed the Act of Union in 1707.